Hi everyone, this is Nathan from Snap Surveys and welcome to another of our SnapXMP webinars. Today we're going to be looking at the offline interviewer app. For those of you who are completely new to it, the SnapXMP offline interviewer app allows you to run face-to-face interviews in locations where data connection is patchy or non-existent. Today I'm going to show you the app in action, which will include a scenario where you have different interviewers, each with their own participant list, or essentially a way of providing a to-do list for each member of your interviewing team. There are lots of benefits associated with using the app. Some are fairly obvious, including the fact that you don't have to contend with bits of paper when out and about. This ties in with the fact that your data is entered as the interview takes place, rather than having to key it all back in when you get back to the office. The data itself is sent back securely to the server if there is a signal, or kept encrypted on the device if you're offline, and then sent off as and when a connection is restored. So as long as you have a signal at some point to get the survey on the device, when you're actually interviewing, it really doesn't matter whether you're on or offline. The form itself can be as feature-packed as you like, containing the full functionality of a SnapXMP online survey, which includes the options of quotas and screenouts to make sure that you're only collecting the data that you need. A few of the lesser known benefits: the app allows for audio recording. This could be the recording of a response to an open-ended question, which means that you're not faced with attempting to speedily input the ramblings of a participant whilst also trying to take in what they're saying at the same time as pretending to look interested. It also means you can get a better idea of the intent or meaning behind the answer, so how happy or angry they are, and sometimes you just need to hear the tone to do that. Another option is to record the audio of the entire interview, so whilst inputting the answers, the whole conversation is captured. This means that you can then listen back when back in the office and capture the off-the-cuff remarks that only a conversation can open up. This can be really useful when you know that you're going into a situation where the conversation will be jumping all over the place, with the participant steering the interview rather than following the flow of the planned questions. Keeping on the idea of conversations, there will always be times when a participant needs to stop the interview. It could be that their phone's just gone off, perhaps the food shop has just turned up, or maybe they've just had enough. Interviews can be saved partway through and then resumed at a later time and date, with the option to also submit partially completed surveys if you don't end up returning to that particular interview. There is also the option to set up the app in Kiosk mode, the idea being that the device is then accessed by passers-by and then locked down to stay within a particular form. If they walk away partway through, the app will reset itself back to the beginning of that particular interview, with the option of any partially completed data to be submitted or deleted. So a whole host of features and functionality which is aimed at making the life of the interviewer who's out on the coalface collecting the data as easy as possible. Okay, let's take a look at the app itself in action. Today I'm going to be using the Windows app on my laptop rather than trying to share the screen of a mobile phone or tablet. Functionally, it's pretty much identical, although you can use biometrics to log in on an Android or Apple device, which can be quite handy when out in the field. And I should add, it does look a bit more app-like on those devices as well. When you open up the app for the first time, it will ask you to connect to your server. I thought it was worth showing you this just to highlight that as well as our two public servers, the UK and the US server, you also have the option of installing SnapXMP and the offline interviewer on your own installation, which would then require you pointing off to the server location here. Today though, I'm going to continue with the UK server. I'll log in today as one of my training accounts, and I'm going to select the option to keep me logged in. You can see it's synchronizing with the server to check which surveys I have access to. At present, I have access to two, a shopping centre survey and the company site visit survey. If either of these surveys were stopped or paused, it would automatically be removed from the list next time I synchronize. Now, I've been talking about how the app works offline, but I've also just synchronized with the server. To confirm, you do need to be online at some point in order to get the surveys onto the device, but after that I can fully disconnect or dig a big hole and encase myself in lead. The surveys will remain fully functional. It just means that the data will sit on the device until such times that I reconnect or re-establish a connection, and I won't have access to any updates which might have been made back in the office. And on that note, if 2 hours into a day of interviewing you realise that you've forgotten to add a question or maybe need to change the spelling of something, you can make the changes back in the office and republish. If your interviewers are online, the survey will be updated on their device. If they aren't, and it's an important change, you might want to get a message across to them to reconnect for a moment in order to pick up those changes. I'll open up the shopping centre interviews and complete a couple of interviews. This example is taking the role of an interviewer-led survey where a member of your team is out and about running face-to-face interviews with people at a shopping centre. Because of this, I've added some interviewer notes which I've just highlighted in a different colour, just to make it stand out. In your setup, it may well be that you're passing the device to the participant for them to complete themselves for certain sections or maybe the entire interview. My one bit of advice though is to consider the interviewer. If they're using this form 50 or 60 times a day, they want simplicity. They will very quickly get bored of seeing lots of image-led questions and having lots and lots of page breaks. So consider the speed and ease of working the way through the form if it's going to be repeatedly used by that same person. If you're handing the device over, that's obviously a completely different scenario where you want it to be as fun and engaging as possible, whilst of course also making sure that it's still user-friendly and not all style over matter. This survey has some dynamic masking to only display the options which are relevant based on previous questions. So in my example today, I'm initially going to choose both options beginning with A, and I'm going to add a comment of City Market. If I move on to the next screen, I'm then going to choose Sainsbury's, so letter S, and then the following screen gives me the two options I chose beginning with A, the option beginning with S, plus the open-ended text I typed before. And then on the next screen we have some static masking, essentially removing options which aren't relevant. So in my example today, both Coke Zero and Pepsi Max are not available for the extra large sizes. I'll click submit and you can see I get a message to say it's been successful, and then essentially it loops back to the beginning of the survey. I'll complete one more. This time I'm going to choose all the options beginning with T. I'm going to add Safeway as my handwritten supermarket. I'm going to choose Costco. So again, I've got the two options beginning with T in Costco plus Safeway, and you notice that I typed it in lowercase, it's been given a capital S. If I was to complete 10 interviews or sit and wait for 10 minutes, the app would automatically synchronize the data. That is a setting that you can change, and that might be something worth considering if the battery life of your device isn't so good. But rather than wait for the app to auto-sync, I'm going to manually synchronize today, so I'll just come out of this particular form and click on sync. That will send any data back to the survey ready to be analysed, and at the same time we'll check to see if there's any updates on these existing surveys, as well as perhaps any additional surveys available based on my account. Okay, let's take a look at a survey which is a little bit more interesting. So I'm going to open up the company site visits. This survey is again taking the line of an interviewer-led questionnaire, but this time I have a group of questionnaires who will be going door to door interviewing at various businesses. In my scenario, I have 2 interviewers, and each of these interviewers will be given a set of people or companies to visit and interview. So effectively, I have a participants list that is being split up between my different interviewers to ensure there's no crossover and the different interviewers don't end up visiting the same businesses. In the background, I have a spreadsheet attached which details my different interviewers and then the different business names, with each business name having an ID associated with them. In my scenario, the different IDs just being the different address names. So today I have NP Training 1, which is the account I was using a moment ago, and they're associated with all the businesses which are on East Street. The second account is training@snapsurveys.com. They've been allocated all the streets on West Street. And then there's a third option, which is North Street. You can see this hasn't actually been allocated to a particular interviewer, and that actually means that this North Street is accessible to both of these interviewers. each business has data attached to them. So I've got a company name, a date or time when the phone check was made, and then any issues which were picked up during that phone call have been identified along here as well. And it's this information which will be pulled into the app. Moving back to the app, remember that I'm already logged in as NP Training 1. So I enter the client ID, which in today's example is the address. So I'm going to go with 17 East Street. As you can see, it's pulling in data from the spreadsheet, including a prompt to check that this is indeed the right business name. So just looking back at the spreadsheet, you can see all good records and all good records. I'll go ahead and fill in some responses. As mentioned, we do have the option to record audio. So we have the audio icon. So rather than me trying to manually input some text, I can just press the record and listen back when back in the office. And then above that, we've got some questions which are going to be used to determine whether a follow-up visit is required. So if I press next. So due to the answers I gave, it's suggesting that a follow-up will not be required. Now today I've given the interviewer the option to override that information. In your case, you may prefer it to be set as a read-only option. A similar example could be used to offer advice and guidance based on the answers given. So this means that the person running the interview and asking the questions doesn't really need to have any of their own sort of background knowledge of whatever it is that's being discussed, as the form itself is going to be providing the knowledge base. I'll click submit, and we're going to do one more, this time 19 East Street. So again, this time it's pulling in snapjacks, so again pulling in the correct information. This time I'm going to save partway through. So down the bottom we've got the option to save. I'm going to give it a name of 19 East Street and click OK. I can then start a brand new interview. I could delete these saved partial, I could submit the partial, or in my case today I'm going to continue where we left off. And this time you can see I've selected one of the options which is going to trigger a follow-up visit. The fact that this person does require a follow-up visit would be picked up at the analysis stage, but it's worth mentioning that an email alert could also be triggered, and this would be sent at the moment that the app synchronizes with the server. I'll click submit, and then I'm actually going to log out of this particular interviewer and this time log in as a different interviewer. This time I'll log in as training@snapsurveys.com. Again, I'm going to choose the option to keep myself logged in. Again, it's synchronizing with the server to see the latest list of surveys I have access to, and today, this time just one. I open up that survey again, and this time I'm going to try and log in as 17 East Street. Click next, and you can see it can't find a user with those particular details. And looking back at our spreadsheet, you can see 17 East Street was associated with NP Training 1, whilst training at Snap Surveys is allocated to all the West Streets. So this time I'll instead log in as maybe 23 West Street. As before, it's picking out the text substitution and looking at the options which were an issue last time. But remember, looking back at our spreadsheet, if I log out of that survey, and this time try and log in as 19 North Street, which wasn't allocated really to anyone in particular. And you can see, even though it wasn't allocated to training, I can actually interview using that person. So likewise, I could log in as NP Training 1 and also I'd get access to this person as well. We'll end by looking at some settings within the app, and these are available to the individual interviewers based on their personal circumstances. These include synchronizing options, which might be worth considering if battery life is a concern. On an Android and Apple app, there's also the option to set a minimum battery percentage before auto synchronizing kicks in. The app can also be set to kiosk mode, which means that once a questionnaire or form is opened, you can't get out of it unless the app is closed down using either the home button on the device or the power button. So assuming you keep these buttons out of reach behind some sort of casing, the selected questionnaire will only be accessible on that device. So assuming that you keep these buttons out of reach, the selected questionnaire will be the only accessible form on the device. There is also the option to override the survey settings. Now, this again might be useful based on the individual needs of a particular interviewer. So settings such as how long before it times out. As I said, you might be handing the device over, so you might wish to give a more personalised message rather than quite a sort of a standardised message. Really, the idea being that each individual interviewer will have their own needs and preferences to make their life as easy as possible. Okay, so hopefully that's given you a good overview of the offline interviewer app and how it could be used across some of your projects. I should also just make it clear that although it's called the offline interviewer, it does very much work if you are online. It's really just for occasions when you can't be sure of a signal or the signal is somewhat unreliable. And yes, it was designed in mind for those of you who are out and about doing interviewing in the proverbial field, but I'm aware of at least a couple of our clients that use it in their call centres, as due to the nature of their business and the additional security walls that their servers are hidden behind, running a standard online survey was hindering the speed at which they could interview. Offline interviewing solved that issue for them. Okay, that's everything I had planned to show today. Thank you for joining me, and we will hopefully see you again soon.